Oh, what has he done?
Stay with me, Tai.
Please, drink this.
He is strong. The ancestors watch over him. He will recover.
The village lay nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, a place where the rhythm of life was dictated by the sun, the rain, and the stories passed down from one generation to the next. Early morning brought the scent of wet earth mingling with smoke from cooking fires. Chickens scratched at the dusty paths, goats bleated in the distance, and the chatter of villagers filled the air as women carried baskets of fruits and vegetables to the market. Children ran barefoot between the huts, their laughter echoing across the open fields, innocent and free. Yet beneath this ordinary bustle, there was a pulse of tension, a quiet awareness of forces unseen, powers older than the village itself. Some villagers spoke openly of spirits and ancestors, offering small prayers at crossroads or leaving food at sacred trees. Others, especially the more worldly or educated among them, scoffed quietly, choosing reason over tradition. Among these skeptics, none were more vocal than Kofi. Kofi was a man of presence impossible to ignore. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed even for the village market, he carried himself like a man who had never been denied anything. His pride was as much a part of him as his shadow. Wealth, influence, and education had given him confidence and arrogance. He believed in the power of reason, in the certainty of modern knowledge, and he had little patience for anything that could not be measured, tested, or explained. On the outskirts of the market sat Amma, the village healer. She was a figure of quiet authority, with hair streaked silver and eyes sharp as flint. Her hands, though weathered with age, moved with precision as she ground herbs into powders, mixed roots into pastes, and whispered incantations no one fully understood. Some villagers sought her guidance for ailments, for advice, or for protection against what they could not see. Others avoided her, unsure whether to respect her or fear her, while a few, like Kofi, openly mocked her. That day, as the market thrummed with activity, Kofi's eyes caught Amma at her usual place under the shade of a mango tree. She was preparing a concoction for a mother who had brought her sick child. A few coins rested in a small clay bowl beside her, evidence that her work was respected by some, even if scorned by others. Kofi strode through the market, boots kicking up clouds of dust. He raised his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Amma, tell me, what miracle are you selling today? Will this potion cure invisible ghosts, or will it simply vanish into smoke?" His laugh was sharp, biting, and full of disdain. A hush fell over the surrounding villagers. Some dared to chuckle nervously, unsure whether to support Kofi's mockery or show respect to the healer. Others looked away, heads bowed, sensing that the moment carried weight beyond mere words. Amma lifted her gaze slowly, her eyes calm but piercing. "Kofi," she said, her voice steady as the river, "you may mock what you do not understand. But there are forces in this world that logic alone cannot touch. The unseen has its ways whether you acknowledge them or not." Kofi's grin widened, cruel and triumphant. "Unseen forces, you say? And yet here you sit, grinding leaves and roots, hoping a mother will believe that her child's sickness can be cured by whispers and mud? I have spent my life studying the world, and I tell you this, your magic is nothing but fantasy." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Children clutched their mothers' hands, sensing the tension. Some older men murmured warnings under their breath. Pride blinds the man who cannot see beyond himself. Others shook their heads, sighing at the arrogance that seemed to grow with Kofi's wealth. Kofi, oblivious to the undercurrents around him, continued. "If you truly had power, Amma, then prove it. Heal someone without fear or trembling. Show me that your ways have merit beyond old stories and superstition." Amma said nothing, only watched, her face composed, her hands steady as she mixed her remedies. There was a gravity in her silence, a quiet challenge that spoke louder than any words Kofi could throw. But Kofi did not notice the subtle shift in the crowd. He did not see the elders leaning slightly forward, or the mothers tugging their children closer. He did not see the wary glances exchanged between vendors. His need to dominate, to assert rational superiority, blinded him to the quiet power he had mocked. He turned back to the market, tossing a few coins at Amma's feet in a gesture both mocking and patronizing. "Keep your powders and charms," he said with finality. "I will rely on reason, on what can be seen, touched, and proven. That is the only way to survive in this world." The market resumed its hum, but whispers lingered like smoke. Some villagers spoke of karma, of consequences for such arrogance. Others worried, not for themselves, but for the child Amma had been helping earlier, wondering whether Kofi's words had disturbed some delicate balance they could not understand. As Kofi walked away, a faint unease prickled at him, a shadow he could not name. It was not fear, not yet. It was something quieter, subtler, a sense that the world was watching, that his words might have weight he had not measured. He shook the thought away, blaming it on fatigue, on the heat of the market, on the noise of voices. Pride, he believed, was armor. Logic his sword. And he was untouchable. But the seeds of doubt, small and invisible, had been sown. Beneath the laughter, beneath the scorn, beneath the veneer of confidence, something in the unseen world had begun to stir. Kofi returned home that evening, the sun dipping behind the hills and painting the sky in streaks of orange and crimson. His feet dragged over the dusty path, his mind still buzzing from the market confrontation with Amma. Yet, as he stepped into his courtyard, the warmth of home wrapped around him like a fragile shield. Children's laughter rang out, and the smell of cooking fires rose from the small kitchen. For a moment he allowed himself to relax. His son, Tay, ran toward him with boundless energy, clutching a carved wooden toy he had made himself. The boy's dark eyes sparkled with curiosity and mischief. "Father, look what I made," he shouted, thrusting the toy forward with pride. Kofi knelt, scooping Tay into his arms. For the first time in many days he felt a flicker of pure joy. He spun the boy around, laughing despite the tension still lingering in his chest. "Well done, Tay. You are cleverer than your old father," he said, his voice softening. But as the sun sank lower, the laughter faded. Tay's small body shivered violently in Kofi's arms. His hands grew clammy, his cheeks flushed with heat, and a whimper escaped his lips. Alarm pricked at Kofi's chest. "Tay? What's wrong?" Ajoa, Kofi's wife, rushed forward, worry etched deep across her face. She knelt beside the boy, pressing a damp cloth to his fevered forehead. "His temperature is high, he's burning up, Kofi," she cried. Panic laced her voice, but Kofi's pride held him back. "It's nothing," he muttered, forcing a calm he did not feel. "Just a fever. Children get fevers all the time. He'll be fine by morning." But morning came and Tay's condition worsened. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were now glassy and distant. He whimpered softly, clutching at his mother's hands, and struggled to speak. Each breath seemed a battle. Kofi's stomach knotted. He had faced challenges before, disputes in the marketplace, opposition from villagers, but nothing had ever struck him like this. Nothing had ever made him feel so powerless. He paced the small courtyard, dragging his hand through his hair, trying to summon the logic and reason that had always been his shield. "I will not call that old woman," Kofi said firmly, his voice shaking despite himself. "I will not let superstition rule this house. Doctors, medicine, reason, these are the tools that work. Not charms." Ajoa's hands trembled as she held Tay close. "Kofi, we have tried everything else. Please, we cannot do nothing." He swallowed hard, his pride warring with the fear clawing at his chest. He wanted to believe he could solve this with reason, with modern remedies, with his own power and intelligence. But the truth pressed heavily against him. Nothing was working. Outside, the wind carried faint whispers from the village. Some neighbors passed by, giving him wary glances. "The man who mocked Amma, now his child suffers," one muttered under her breath. Another shook his head, adding quietly, "Pride does not protect the foolish." Kofi ignored them. He tried cool compresses, herbal teas, and medicines prescribed by the local doctor. Each effort seemed to fail faster than the last. Tay's fever rose higher, his tiny body trembling uncontrollably, and his whimpers pierced Kofi's heart like knives. The night deepened. Shadows stretched across the walls of their small home, flickering in the lamplight. Every rustle of the wind, every creak of the roof sounded louder than it should. Kofi felt eyes watching him, an invisible weight pressing down though no one was there. Guilt, fear, and helplessness tangled together inside him, suffocating him. Kofi sank onto a low stool, his hands trembling, his chest tight. I should have listened," he whispered to himself, a confession he could not share aloud. He recalled his laughter at the market, the cruel words he had hurled at Amma. He remembered the way villagers had looked at him then, warning in their silence, and he saw now how right they had been. Ajoa knelt beside him, her face pale and drawn. "Kofi," he's slipping away. "Please, don't let pride kill him too. Call Amma." Kofi's jaw tightened. Pride was a heavy chain, and for a moment he could not break it. But each time he looked at Tay, his small frame racked with fever, his eyes dim and desperate, something in him began to crack. A seed of realization took root. His arrogance had brought them here. His mockery had invited forces he could not control. The villagers' whispers grew louder in his mind, echoing through the walls. Pride has a cost. The unseen does not forgive. For the first time, Kofi felt true fear. Not fear for himself, not fear of shame, but fear for the boy he loved more than life itself. He clenched his fists and sank to the floor beside Tay. He pressed his forehead against his son's, feeling the heat, the rapid pulse, the fragility of life itself. I will do what I must, he whispered through clenched teeth. I cannot lose you, Tay. I will not lose you. Ajoa's tears fell freely now, running down her cheeks as she pressed herself against her son. The wind outside picked up, rustling the trees and sending an eerie shiver through the house. Something in the air seemed to murmur warnings, as if the village itself were watching, as if Amma's quiet gaze from the market still lingered unseen. The night stretched long. Kofi could not sleep. He sat beside Tay, refusing to leave his side, haunted by every choice, every word, every ounce of pride he had clung to. The boy's small whimpers, the helplessness in his eyes, and the creeping fear that he might lose him gnawed at his heart. And beneath it all, a single, unspoken truth began to take shape. Some forces in the world were beyond logic, beyond reason, beyond even the proudest of men. Whether he accepted it or not, Kofi now faced a reckoning he could not escape. The dawn of the second day was still hours away, but Kofi's journey from skepticism to desperation had already begun. By the third day, the small house in the village was heavy with fear. The sun rose pale and hesitant, as if even the sky feared what might come. Inside, Tay lay on a thin mat, shivering beneath damp sheets. His small body was frail, trembling with every breath, and his eyes, once bright and full of mischief, now stared glassy and distant at the ceiling. Every whimper, every sigh felt like a jagged blade in Kofi's chest. Kofi paced the room, rubbing his hands over his face, his chest tight with a mix of helplessness and mounting guilt. His mind raced. He had tried every modern remedy he knew. Herbal teas boiled to exact temperatures, the doctors prescribed medicine, constant monitoring, but nothing worked. Each attempt ended in failure, and each failure sharpened the edge of fear in his heart. I've done everything, Kofi muttered, his voice hoarse. Everything the doctor said, everything. Why is this happening? Ajoa knelt beside Tay, cradling his head against her chest, murmuring soft prayers under her breath. Her face was pale, eyes red from sleepless nights and tears shed in desperation. She looked at Kofi, her expression full of pleading. Kofi, we cannot fight this with pride. We have to seek help, wherever it comes from. Kofi clenched his fists, anger and frustration bubbling. I will not bow to superstition, he spat, his voice trembling. I will not let the unseen control my life. But deep inside, the words rang hollow. Even as he spoke them, he felt their futility. He had mocked Amma only days before, dismissed her wisdom and the traditions of the village, and now, his son lay at the edge of life and he was powerless. Memories came to him in flashes, cruel and vivid. The market square, Amma grinding her herbs under the mango tree, the laughter he had thrown like a weapon, the villagers' knowing glances, each image burned against his mind like a warning he had ignored. Pride had been his shield and arrogance his armor, but now those very things felt like chains, binding him to helplessness and despair. He sank onto a wooden stool, head in his hands. The room was silent except for Tay's soft, labored breathing and the occasional creak of the roof above. Kofi felt an unfamiliar chill run through his body, the kind of shiver that has nothing to do with weather. It was as if the very house had grown aware of his guilt, as if every shadow, every whisper of wind, carried the weight of his arrogance. The villagers' whispers grew louder in his mind, even when no one was near. He mocked the healer, and now his child suffers. Pride has its price. He could hear the echo of Amma's calm, piercing eyes. The unseen has its ways. It was no longer a threat. It was a truth he could no longer deny. Night fell, and with it came dreams that left him trembling. In the darkness, he saw Tay lying still, unresponsive, while Amma's face loomed over him, calm but unyielding. Shadows twisted around her, and voices, some harsh, some gentle, repeated warnings he could not forget. He awoke with his heart pounding, sweat cooling on his fevered forehead, feeling as though the night itself had whispered a terrible prophecy. Kofi's desperation deepened with each passing hour. He had always believed knowledge and strength would protect his family, but now he realized that pride alone could not shield them. Modern medicine had failed, reason had failed, and every ounce of control he thought he possessed was slipping through his fingers. He sat by his son's side, gripping Tay's small hand in his own, tears he could not hold back streaming silently down his face. "Forgive me, Tay," he whispered, voice breaking. "Forgive me for laughing, for mocking, for thinking I knew better. I did not. I was blind. Please, survive. Please." Ajoa rested her hand on his shoulder, grounding him. Her voice was calm but firm. "Kofi, it is not too late. We must let go of fear and, yes, of pride. If there is hope anywhere, it is with her." Kofi stiffened, pride warring with desperation. But as he gazed at Tay, each shallow breath, each shiver, each pleading glance from his son broke down the last of his resistance. There was no room left for arrogance, no room for denial. Love, raw and fierce, had replaced pride, and it demanded action. Outside, the village seemed to hold its breath. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying voices that were half wind, half warning. Shadows of unseen forces seemed to move in the corners of the small courtyard. The air felt charged, alive, as if the world itself were waiting for Kofi to make his choice. Finally he stood, his hands shaking, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Take me to her," he said to Ajoa. I will do whatever she asks. I cannot lose him. I will not." The tension in the house was nearly unbearable, the fear and guilt hanging thickly like the humid summer air. Kofi's heart raced with the terror of what had already happened and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But for the first time he felt the first flicker of humility, a recognition that he was not in control, that some forces could not be tamed by pride alone. As the night deepened, he prepared himself. The path ahead was uncertain. The healer Amma had been mocked. He had dismissed her wisdom. Yet now, in the shadow of possible loss, Kofi understood that there was no other path. The unseen, the ancient, the mysterious, all of it demanded respect. And he was finally ready, trembling but determined, to confront it. The storm of despair had reached its peak. Kofi's pride lay shattered, replaced by regret, fear, and an aching love strong enough to break any barrier. Outside, the wind rose, whispering warnings and perhaps guidance. Inside, a man who had once scorned the old ways knelt beside his son, ready to seek the very wisdom he had mocked, and to pray that it was not too late. The road to Amma's hut was narrow and winding, lined with tall grasses that whispered secrets as the wind passed through. Kofi walked ahead, each step heavy with fear, guilt, and an unfamiliar humility. The village seemed different now, almost silent, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Every bird call, every rustle of leaves, carried a subtle warning. What had been ignored could not remain forgotten. Ajoa followed, carrying Tay wrapped in blankets, his small body shivering even in her arms. The boy's face was pale, his eyes half closed, yet he stirred slightly when he felt his mother's touch. The sight tightened something deep inside Kofi, a sharp reminder of the price of arrogance. Amma's hut emerged through the shadows of the trees, simple and unassuming. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the early morning air, carrying the scent of herbs and earth. The old healer sat outside, grinding roots with methodical care. She looked up at Kofi and Ajoa, her gaze steady, unwavering, almost piercing. Kofi hesitated. His pride, battered and bruised, still whispered at the edges of his mind. "You are a man of reason. Why bow to superstition?" But the sound of Tay's faint whimpers cut through the last remnants of that arrogance. He swallowed hard, stepping forward. "Amma," he began, voice low, uncertain. I need your help. My son, he is very ill. I was wrong to mock you. Please, I beg you, help us." Amma's eyes softened slightly, but her expression remained firm. "You have come," she said, "but help comes with a price, Kofi. Not gold, not coin, but humility, patience, and respect. If you cannot offer these, your son may not survive, no matter what you believe." Kofi felt a cold knot in his stomach. Humility, patience, respect. Words that had once seemed unnecessary, even foolish, now felt heavy with meaning. He nodded slowly, swallowing the last vestiges of pride. I will do whatever you ask," he whispered, voice shaking. Amma stood and beckoned them inside. The hut smelled of earth, herbs, and incense, a mixture that was at once soothing and unsettling. Inside, shelves of dried roots, jars of powders, and bundles of herbs lined the walls. Candles flickered in small alcoves, casting long shadows that danced across the room. It was a space that felt alive, almost breathing with ancient knowledge. She motioned for Tay to be placed on a straw mat in the center of the room. Kofi knelt beside his son, holding his small hand tightly, while Ajoa hovered close, whispering soft prayers. Amma began her work methodically. She crushed herbs with a smooth stone, murmuring words that neither Kofi nor Ajoa understood. She sprinkled powders into boiling water, stirring in patterns that seemed deliberate yet strange, and anointing Tay with oils pressed from sacred leaves. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows over his frail body, and Kofi could not look away. Each ritual, each chant felt like a test. Kofi's mind screamed at him to stop, to retreat to reason, to reject the unseen. Yet, with every motion he saw something subtle, a slight easing of Tay's tremors, a faint color returning to his cheeks, a shallow breath that seemed steadier than before. Hours passed. Kofi remained at Tay's side, his hands never leaving the boy's small fingers. The fear and guilt that had gnawed at him now mingled with a tentative hope. He watched Amma silently, noticing the precision of her movements, the patience in her voice, and the quiet authority in her eyes. Outside, the village seemed to lean closer, its whispers carried on the wind. Some villagers had gathered at a distance, curious and wary. Some doubted the healer, some hoped silently for the boy's survival. Kofi felt their eyes upon him, weighing him, judging him, and yet it did not matter. Only Tay mattered now. As the first light of dawn seeped through the hut's small windows, Tay stirred slightly, a soft groan escaping his lips. Kofi's heart leapt. The faintest spark of life, fragile but undeniable, filled him with both relief and terror. He had seen too much darkness to allow himself full hope, yet he could not deny what he saw. Amma looked at him, her expression calm but unyielding. "This is only the beginning, Kofi," she said. "The path to healing is not instant. You must continue to honor humility, to watch, to wait, and to act with patience. Your son's survival will depend on it, and so will yours." Kofi nodded again, swallowing hard. He felt an unfamiliar weight settle on his shoulders. A weight of responsibility, yes, but also of understanding. Pride had led him here, but love and humility might be what saved him. He tightened his grip on Tay's hand, whispering a promise he barely dared to voice. "I will do everything you ask. I swear it," he said, voice cracking. I will learn. I will wait. I will respect. I will not fail you, Tay." Amma returned to her work, the room now filled with the quiet rhythm of preparation, ritual, and care. Kofi sat back on his heels, exhausted but alert, watching, waiting, and learning in the only way he could, through patience and reverence. Each moment stretched long, tension mixing with hope, fear with relief. The villagers, still gathered at the edge of the clearing, whispered among themselves. Some doubted, some prayed, some simply watched. But in that hut, inside that circle of flickering candles, a father who had once scorned tradition now knelt in reverence, facing not just his son's illness but the consequences of his own arrogance. For the first time, Kofi realized that true power was not in pride or reason alone, but in humility, patience, and the courage to face the unknown. And as he held Tay's hand through the long hours, he felt a flicker of something he had never truly known before: hope. The days that followed Amma's first rituals were long and grueling. Kofi never left Tay's side, his hands gripping the small, frail fingers of his son as though his life depended on the touch alone, because it did. Each sunrise brought hope, but each sunset carried new fear. Recovery was not a gentle arc but a jagged climb, full of setbacks that tested Kofi's endurance and faith. The first few days Tay's fever seemed to relent, only to spike again in the dead of night. Kofi would feel his chest tighten with every shiver, every labored breath. Ajoa tried to soothe both father and son, whispering prayers and encouraging words, but even her voice shook with worry. Kofi's own heart pounded with guilt. Every setback felt like a consequence of his arrogance, a punishment for the pride he had once worn so comfortably. Amma worked tirelessly, her hands steady, her chants deliberate. She combined herbs, pressed oils, and moved with ritualized precision, each step both familiar and mysterious. Sometimes Kofi could see faint signs of improvement, Tay's eyelids fluttering, a weak smile forming, a breath that was steadier than the last. But just as often, the boy's condition faltered, and Kofi's hope wavered like a candle in the wind. One night, as a storm rumbled over the hills and rain beat against the hut's roof, Tay's fever surged dangerously. Kofi felt panic coil in his chest like a living thing. "No, not now. Please, Amma, help him," he shouted, his voice breaking. His fists shook as he gripped his son, willing strength into his tiny body through sheer desperation. Amma remained calm, her voice quiet but firm. "Kofi, you cannot command the unseen. You cannot force the balance. You must watch, you must wait, and you must trust." The words cut through him like ice. Trust, patience, humility. Concepts he had once mocked now became lifelines, yet they demanded surrender, a letting go of control that was almost unbearable. For the first time, Kofi realized that his love for his son was not enough. He had to release some of his fear and pride, and allow forces he could not see to do their work. Sleep became a fragile stranger. Kofi and Ajoa took shifts sitting beside Tay, praying, murmuring encouragement, and sometimes just holding him as his small body fought to recover. At times, Tay's eyes would flutter open and a weak smile would touch his lips. Kofi's chest would swell with relief, only for it to be replaced by dread when the fever returned. During these long nights, Kofi's mind wandered. He reflected on every insult, every laugh, every cruel word he had cast toward Amma in the market. He remembered the villagers' murmurs, the glances of warning he had ignored. Guilt and regret gnawed at him relentlessly. He felt the sharp weight of responsibility, not just for his son's life, but for the arrogance that had nearly destroyed it. Amma's healing was more than physical. She asked Kofi to participate in small rituals, stirring mixtures, arranging herbs, and chanting simple words of respect and acknowledgement. At first he stumbled, skeptical and awkward, but gradually he began to see the subtle signs. Tay's hand twitching at the right moment, a soft breath timed with the ritual, a faint color returning to the cheeks. With each small success, Kofi's heart lifted, and with each setback his despair deepened. The villagers watched from a distance, some skeptical, some awed. Rumors of curses and consequences swirled through the village like a storm cloud. He mocked Amma, now see, some whispered. Others clutched talismans and muttered prayers, uncertain whether to hope or fear. Kofi became a figure of both pity and quiet admiration, a man forced to confront the limits of pride and the power of unseen forces. One night, Tay's fever climbed so high that his small body convulsed. Kofi's hands shook uncontrollably as he held him close. "Please, not now, stay with me, Tay," he cried, tears streaming down his face. Ajoa tried to calm him, but Kofi was lost in panic, fear, and the unbearable thought of losing the boy he loved. Amma moved with purpose, chanting, anointing, and sprinkling herbs in precise patterns. Kofi watched, silent and trembling. Every moment stretched into eternity. Finally, as the first light of dawn seeped through the hut, Tay's body relaxed, the fever receding enough for him to rest. Kofi collapsed beside him, exhausted, grateful, and shaken to his core. It was in those moments, watching his son's fragile recovery, that Kofi began to transform. Pride, once his armor, now felt hollow. Arrogance, once his shield, now seemed dangerous. He realized that respect, humble, patient, unwavering respect, was stronger than any logic, any power, any wealth he had once relied on. By the end of the week, small miracles emerged. Tay's eyes sparkled faintly with recognition, his fingers flexed, and his cheeks carried a pale hint of warmth. Kofi felt a fragile hope take root, tempered by the memory of setbacks. Each success was a reminder of the thin line between life and death, humility and hubris. Kofi knelt beside his son one evening, head bowed, hands pressed together. "I understand now," he whispered, voice barely audible. "I was wrong. Pride nearly cost us everything. But I will learn. I will respect. I will never forget this lesson." Amma watched him from across the hut, silent, her eyes calm but knowing. The trials had not yet ended, but Kofi had begun to understand that healing was as much about patience and humility as it was about herbs and ritual. Outside, the village breathed cautiously. Whispers of awe, curiosity, and fear drifted through the trees. Some still doubted the healer, some still feared Kofi's fate, but all watched with bated breath as a man once consumed by pride slowly learned the cost of arrogance, and the transformative power of love, patience, and respect. For Kofi, each day became a test of faith, endurance, and the courage to confront the limits of his control. And as he watched Tay sleep, weak but alive, he felt the first deep, true understanding of the delicate balance between the seen and the unseen, between pride and humility, between life and loss. The village had changed in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Where once the market had been a place of casual chatter and cheerful banter, now whispers carried on the wind like dark clouds. Mothers pulled their children close, and elders shook their heads with uneasy glances. Every corner, every pathway seemed charged with tension. The story of Kofi's son, Tay, and the old healer Amma had spread quickly, twisting with rumor, fear, and awe. Some villagers celebrated Amma's skill in hushed tones. "She has power beyond what we can see," they murmured, reverent. Others whispered warnings. Kofi mocked her. "Now see, he is at her mercy. Who knows what will happen next?" The line between admiration and fear blurred, and the village seemed caught in a suspended breath, waiting for fate to decide. Kofi moved through the village with a new awareness. Heads turned as he passed, eyes heavy with judgment, pity, or curiosity. The weight of every whisper pressed on him, each glance a reminder of his earlier arrogance. He could feel the invisible threads of consequence woven tightly around him, binding him to the choices he had made. Pride, he realized, was no shield here, it had become a cage. Even the market seemed different. Vendors whispered behind their hands and children avoided his path. Yet, amid the tension there was something else: hope. Small flickers of it lingered in those who watched Kofi's dedication to his son, who saw the man kneeling in humility at Amma's hut, facing powers he could neither see nor control. The villagers were on edge, caught between dread and fascination, and no one dared look away. That night a storm swept over the village. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the huts in stark, fleeting flashes. Rain fell in sheets, drumming on rooftops and muddy paths. The wind carried with it a chorus of whispers, as if the forest itself were speaking. Some villagers hurried to secure their homes. Others, brave or foolish, stood at their thresholds, staring at the heavens, murmuring prayers. Inside Kofi's home, the tension was mirrored in the flickering candlelight. Tay slept, fragile and pale, while Kofi and Ajoa sat vigil. Each roll of thunder, each flash of lightning, seemed to echo the village's anxiety. Every shadow cast against the wall seemed to grow larger, more menacing. Kofi felt a cold knot tighten in his chest, realizing how close they had come to losing everything. Across the village, small confrontations broke out. Some villagers, skeptical and emboldened by fear, dared to speak against Amma and her practices. "It is all superstition," one shouted across the marketplace. "We cannot bow to old tales and charms." But others defended her quietly, their voices firm despite the rain. "Do you not see the boy? He lives because of her wisdom," an elder said. "She honors forces we cannot comprehend. We ignore them at our peril." The tension reached a fevered pitch. Kofi, aware of every argument, every glance, felt the weight of leadership in a village that had once admired his confidence. He realized that his earlier arrogance had not only endangered his family but had rippled outward, stirring fear and doubt among those who trusted him. The man who had mocked tradition was now both lesson and warning, a figure embodying the fragile balance between pride and humility. Even in the quiet moments, the village seemed alive with anticipation. Fires burned in small hearths, casting shadows that danced like spirits along the walls. Dogs barked nervously in the distance, and the wind moaned through the trees. Something had shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable, a sense that the unseen world was observing, waiting, measuring the consequences of human arrogance. Kofi felt the weight of it all pressing on him. He had been a skeptic, a man of reason, untouchable in his pride. Now he was humbled, caught in the delicate web of love, fear, and forces he could not name. He knew that Tay's recovery was fragile, dependent not only on Amma's skill but on his willingness to continue walking the path of humility and respect. As he looked out over the village from the small hill near his home, he saw families huddled in their homes, candles flickering in windows, children whispering to each other, and elders watching the storm in silent prayer. Every face seemed etched with the same question: would the boy survive? Could a man who had scorned tradition learn the lesson he needed before it was too late? The whispers of the village carried deeper meaning now. It was no longer idle gossip or judgment, it was the collective consciousness of a community on edge, caught between fear, hope, and awe. And within that collective tension, Kofi understood the fragile nature of life, the weight of responsibility, and the cost of pride. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the village damp, quiet, and uneasy. Kofi stood beside Amma's hut once more, watching as the first rays of sunlight pierced the mist. The villagers began to emerge, cautious, curious, and respectful. Some offered quiet nods of acknowledgement, others avoided his gaze entirely. The village was watching, still uncertain, still holding its breath. In that fragile calm, Kofi realized something vital. The trials were not only for his son, nor only for himself. They were for the village as well. Every action, every choice, every gesture carried weight. The unseen forces he had ignored now demanded attention, respect, and understanding. The boy's illness, once a personal crisis, had become a lesson in humility and awareness for the entire community. And as the village waited, hearts heavy with anticipation, Kofi understood that the climax of this ordeal was approaching. Tay's fate, the culmination of pride, arrogance, and newfound humility, hung in the balance, and the unseen forces of the world seemed poised to reveal the final measure of their power. The night descended over the village like a heavy curtain, thick and suffocating. A chill wind swept through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and smoke from the hearths that still burned in the scattered homes. Even the stars seemed dim, hidden behind dark clouds that churned ominously above the hills. In Kofi's home, the air was tense, almost alive with anticipation and dread. Tay lay on the straw mat in the center of the room, pale and trembling, his small chest rising and falling with shallow, irregular breaths. Kofi sat at his son's side, gripping his hand tightly, feeling the frailty of life as sharply as the first time he had seen his son's fever spike. Ajoa hovered close, whispering prayers under her breath, her eyes red from sleepless nights. The room was dimly lit by flickering candles, shadows dancing across the walls like restless spirits. Amma moved with calm precision, her hands steady, her chants low and rhythmic. She sprinkled powders into bowls of water, grinding herbs with deliberate care, and arranged them in intricate patterns around Tay's mat. Every movement carried weight, every word seemed to hold power beyond comprehension. Kofi watched, torn between awe, fear, and disbelief. "You must focus, Kofi," Amma said softly without looking at him. "Tonight, the balance is delicate. Your son's life depends not only on these rituals but on your humility and willingness to surrender to the unseen." Kofi's throat tightened. Humility had never come easily to him. Pride had been his companion, arrogance his shield. Now, confronted by the fragility of his son's life, he felt stripped bare, every misstep, every insult, every laugh at Amma's wisdom replaying in his mind like a cruel echo. The wind outside howled as Amma began the central ritual. Candles were arranged in a circle around Tay, their flames trembling as the storm gusted through the cracks in the walls. Amma's voice rose and fell in an unfamiliar cadence, chanting in a language Kofi did not understand, but somehow felt resonate in his chest. She traced patterns in the air with her hands, sprinkled herbs in precise arcs, and muttered prayers that seemed to pull at the threads of the night itself. Kofi clenched his fists. "Please, let this work," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Let him live." Tay groaned, and a shiver ran through his small body. Kofi leaned closer, his heart hammering. The boy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware enough to grasp his father's hand. I'm scared," Kofi whispered, pressing his forehead gently against Tay's. His voice trembled with emotion he could no longer contain. Fear, guilt, love, and desperation all colliding in one painful moment. The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing in brilliant forks across the sky, illuminating the room in stark, fleeting bursts. Each flash cast Tay's frail form into sharp relief, each shadow seeming to grow, twist, and dance as if alive. The wind rattled the roof, carrying whispers that sounded like voices, some pleading, some warning, some sorrowful. Kofi could not tell if they were real or the sound of his own frayed nerves, but the sensation added to the mounting fear in the room. Amma's voice never wavered. She sprinkled a final handful of powdered herbs across the circle and raised her hands toward the ceiling. "Now," she said softly, "you must let go, Kofi. Surrender your fear, your pride, and your need for control. Trust the balance." Kofi swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every choice he had ever made pressing down on him. Pride, arrogance, skepticism, all meaningless now. Only love remained, raw and unyielding. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I surrender. Please, save him." The room seemed to hold its breath. The candles flickered violently, casting wild shadows. Rain pounded against the roof in a frenzied rhythm. For a moment, it felt as if the world had stopped, suspended in a delicate balance between life and death, humility and pride, hope and despair. Then Tay's small body shifted. A weak, tremulous smile touched his lips. His chest, though still frail, rose and fell with a steadier rhythm. Kofi felt tears burn his eyes as relief and fear collided. He held Tay close, pressing a desperate kiss to his forehead. "You're still here," he whispered, voice choked with emotion. "You're still with me." Amma's eyes met his. "The night is not over," she cautioned. "But the path has begun. You have learned to let go, to respect, to hope. Your son is fragile, but he is alive because you faced your own arrogance and surrendered it to the unseen." Kofi nodded, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had transpired. Every ounce of pride, every moment of scorn, every laugh at the healer's wisdom. He carried it all now, tempered by fear, humility, and love. Outside, the storm began to abate, the wind softening to a mournful whisper. Lightning flickered one last time, and the village seemed to exhale as though the unseen forces themselves were easing their watch. The night had been a crucible, testing Kofi, his family, and even the villagers who had waited anxiously, caught between dread and hope. Kofi remained kneeling beside Tay, holding him close, feeling the fragile rhythm of life return to the boy's body. The healer continued her chants quietly, finishing the ritual with deliberate care. Kofi understood, more fully than ever, that the unseen world demanded respect, patience, and humility. As dawn approached, pale light filtered into the hut, casting gentle illumination over the exhausted family. The storm had passed, leaving behind a village on edge but still breathing, a father transformed by fear and love, and a boy who had faced the brink of death and returned. Morning broke over the village slowly, pale light creeping across the rooftops and mist-laden fields. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and heavy with the scent of wet earth. For the first time in days, the village seemed quieter, as if holding its breath after the night of fear and uncertainty. Inside Amma's hut, the first rays of sunlight touched Tay's small face. His breathing was steady, his body warmer than it had been for weeks, though still fragile. Kofi knelt beside him, holding his hand, tears slipping quietly down his cheeks. Relief washed over him, mingled with awe and lingering fear. He had stared death in the face, and now life had returned, delicate but undeniable. Ajoa rested beside Tay, gently brushing back the boy's damp hair. Her face, though pale from sleepless nights, now carried a tentative smile. "He's awake," she whispered. "He's really awake." Kofi looked at his son, his chest tightening with emotion he could not contain. "I promise," he said, voice breaking. "I will never forget this. I will never mock, never dismiss, never let pride blind me again." He pressed a soft kiss to Tay's forehead, feeling the warmth of life beneath his lips, a miracle born of patience, humility, and love. Amma observed quietly, her calm presence a steady anchor. "This is only the beginning," she said softly. "Healing is a journey, not a single moment. But the worst has passed. You have learned humility, and it has saved your son." Kofi's eyes met hers, and he felt a profound shift inside him. Pride, arrogance, and disbelief, the traits that had once defined him, were gone, replaced by gratitude, respect, and an understanding of his own limitations. He had mocked her wisdom, yet it was that very wisdom, tempered by patience and reverence, that had spared his son's life. The villagers, drawn by curiosity and the news of Tay's survival, began to gather outside. Some came cautiously, offering nods and whispered congratulations. Others hung back, unsure if the boy's life was truly restored or if it had been a fleeting moment of hope. But all sensed the transformation, not just in Kofi but in the balance between the seen and unseen, between pride and humility. Kofi stood before the villagers for the first time since Tay's illness began. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, now carried warmth and gravity. "I was wrong," he said, his voice steady. "I mocked the wisdom of our elders and the forces we do not understand. My pride almost cost my family everything. But I have learned that life is fragile, and respect, patience, and humility are stronger than any strength we can wield through arrogance alone." The villagers listened, some nodding, some silent, others hesitant, yet all aware that the words came from a man who had faced the consequences of his own hubris. Kofi's transformation was undeniable, and even those who had doubted Amma's power could not ignore the miracle before them. Tay, alive and slowly regaining strength. Over the following days, Kofi devoted himself to his son's recovery and the rebuilding of trust within his family. He learned to listen, to Ajoa, to Amma, to the wisdom of those who had guided him. Each small act of care, each whispered word of encouragement, deepened the bond between father and son. Kofi discovered that true power did not come from pride or domination but from love, patience, and a willingness to respect the unknown. Amma's presence remained a quiet but powerful force in the household. She visited each day, guiding Kofi and Ajoa through small rituals, monitoring Tay's recovery, and teaching lessons about balance, respect, and the consequences of arrogance. Her wisdom was no longer an object of mockery but a guiding light, illuminating the fragile boundary between life and death, pride and humility. The village slowly returned to its routines, but the shadow of recent events lingered. Kofi became a figure of transformation, a living example of what could happen when pride went unchecked, but also of the redemption possible through love, humility, and respect. He shared his story with others, warning them against arrogance, teaching patience, and emphasizing the delicate balance between human effort and the forces beyond comprehension. Tay grew stronger with each passing day. His laughter returned, bright and lively, filling the house with warmth that had been absent during the dark nights of fever and fear. Kofi watched him play, a deep gratitude settling in his chest. He understood that life, once so easily taken for granted, was fragile and precious. Every heartbeat, every breath, was a gift, one he would no longer risk with pride or mockery. One evening, as the sun set in a wash of gold and crimson, Kofi and Ajoa sat together, watching Tay chase a ball through the courtyard. The village hummed quietly in the background, life continuing but subtly changed. Respect for tradition, awareness of unseen forces, and the lessons of humility lingered in every gaze, every step, every whispered story. Amma appeared at the edge of the courtyard as she often did, quiet, distant, yet undeniably present. Her eyes met Kofi's briefly, a knowing glance passing between them. No words were needed, the message was clear. The boy was alive, the lesson had been learned, and balance, however delicate, had been restored. Kofi turned back to Tay, his heart full. "We will never forget," he said softly. "I will honor this gift every day, and I will teach him the lessons I learned too late." Ajoa squeezed his hand, and together they watched their son, thriving and joyful, a living reminder of the power of humility, patience, and love. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village. Life continued, subtly changed by fear, hope, and the quiet miracles that had unfolded. Pride had nearly destroyed a family, yet love, humility, and respect had saved them. And in that moment, Kofi understood a truth he would carry forever. Redemption was possible, but only for those who dared to face themselves, embrace humility, and honor the delicate balance of life. The village had begun to breathe again, slowly, cautiously, as if it were waking from a long, tense dream. The markets hummed with life, the children's laughter returned to the dusty paths, and the elders sat in their usual places, nodding to one another with quiet approval. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of life, a subtle change lingered, one that could not be ignored. The story of Tay, of Kofi, and of Amma's wisdom had etched itself into the village consciousness, a lesson that would endure for generations. Kofi walked through the village, his posture different now, no longer proud and imperious but steady and grounded. Heads turned as they always did, but now he met their gazes with calm humility. Where once whispers had followed him like shadows, now they carried a sense of cautious respect. Some still doubted, some remained skeptical of Amma's powers, but all recognized that something profound had occurred. Kofi had faced the consequences of arrogance, and he had emerged transformed. At home the atmosphere was lighter. Tay's cheeks were flushed with the color of health, his laughter ringing through the courtyard as he ran and played. Kofi and Ajoa watched from the doorway, hearts swelling with relief and gratitude. Every step the boy took, every squeal of delight, was a reminder of the night when life had teetered on the edge and love and humility had saved them. Kofi often found himself reflecting on the events that had brought him here. He thought of the market, of his laughter at Amma's remedies, of the arrogance that had blinded him. He remembered the fear, the sleepless nights, and the helplessness that had clawed at his chest when Tay's fever rose uncontrollably. And he understood, finally, that those moments of fear had not only tested him but had revealed who he truly was, and who he could become. With this understanding came responsibility. Kofi began to share his story with others, especially young men and elders who still prided themselves on reason over respect. He spoke of pride and its dangers, of the consequences that followed when wisdom was ignored. He taught patience, the importance of humility, and the need to honor forces beyond one's sight. The villagers listened, some hesitant, some incredulous, but all aware that the lessons were born from truth, not mere story. Amma remained a quiet but potent presence in Kofi's life. She visited often, sometimes silently, sometimes guiding the family with simple gestures or a word of advice. Her role in their lives was both permanent and elusive. She was there when needed, absent when her lessons were absorbed, a living symbol of the unseen balance that governed their world. Even now, the villagers regarded her with a mixture of reverence and wariness, never quite understanding the full extent of her knowledge. Kofi noticed subtle changes in the village itself. People began to speak with more caution, to observe rituals and traditions with renewed respect. Children were taught not just to fear but to understand, to see the world as something alive and interconnected, where every action had consequence. Markets, festivals, and daily routines continued, yet the stories of that dark time were woven into every lesson, every warning, every shared smile. In his home, the family healed not only in body but in spirit. Kofi's bond with Ajoa deepened, strengthened by shared fear, shared hope, and the realization that love and respect must guide every action. He cherished Tay with a new intensity, knowing that life was fragile, precious, and unpredictable. Every bedtime story, every embrace, carried the weight of gratitude for survival, humility for mistakes, and hope for the future. One afternoon, Kofi led Tay to the river where the boys splashed and laughed freely. "Do you remember," Kofi said softly, "the night when we learned to let go and trust?" Tay's wide eyes sparkled, innocent yet perceptive. "Yes, Papa. We did it together." Kofi smiled, understanding that this moment, simple, joyful, and filled with life, was the truest reward. The ordeal had left its mark, but it had also created a foundation for resilience, empathy, and connection. The village continued to tell the story. Not in fear or mockery, but as a cautionary tale of pride and its consequences, of love and its power to transform. Kofi became a mentor of sorts, quietly guiding others, teaching them that strength alone was not enough. Respect, patience, humility, and understanding were equally vital. Even Amma, though she remained a mysterious figure, sometimes appeared at the edges of the village, her presence a gentle reminder that the unseen world watches, that life is delicate, and that every choice carries weight. Kofi understood that her power lay not only in herbs and rituals but in the lessons she imparted about living with awareness and reverence. Years passed. Tay grew strong, curious, and joyful, a living testament to the night that had almost taken him away. Kofi and Ajoa nurtured him with love, patience, and guidance, never forgetting the lessons learned in the crucible of fear and humility. And the village thrived, subtly transformed by the events that had tested them all. In the quiet moments, Kofi often stood on the hill overlooking the village, feeling the gentle pulse of life around him. He breathed in the scents of earth and grass, listened to the laughter of children, and felt the wind against his face. And he understood fully finally that life's balance is fragile, respect is essential, and love is the most powerful force of all. The lessons endured. Pride had almost destroyed a family, a father had almost lost his child, and a village had nearly forgotten the power of humility. Yet through patience, respect, and unwavering love, life had been restored. And in that restoration, the village, the family, and Kofi himself found hope, wisdom, and the quiet joy of knowing that even the deepest mistakes could lead to lasting change.